up night. Feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wide variety. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the crew. Untold Radio Network, the secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Good evening, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes. Welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram. I'm delighted you're joining me tonight. Where I am, it's a very, very cold and snow-blanketed winter night up here in the North Woods, and I can't think of many nights that would be more appropriate to chat about what we're going to be chatting about tonight, which is monsters in this part of the world, whether it's the Dogman or the Wendigo or the Hodag or even strange deep ones from Devil's Lake. And who better to have to chat about this than probably one of the state's experts on these type of critters. He's an author, a speaker, a researcher and explorer, celebrated for his deep dive into the rich folklore of Wisconsin. As a creator of Badgerland Legends and co-host of the Wisconsin Legends podcast, he brings a unique blend of storytelling and investigation of the mysteries of the Badger State. His engaging presentations have earned him invitations to speak at paranormal conferences, banquets, festivals, and conventions, where he captivates audiences with tales of the unknown, forgotten history, and local legends. And indeed, he did, because I was lucky enough to see one of his wonderful presentations when I was down at Milwaukee Paracon last October. At any rate, I'm delighted to welcome back to Talking Weird my very good friend, Jeff Finup. Jeff.
Thanks so much for having me, Dean. Pleasure to join you this evening from the wilds of Wisconsin on this snowy, cold, moonlit night.
I can't literally think of a better night to have this kind of conversation, as we were talking about even before the show. And I just said to the audience then, so just quickly before we start, how's your winter season been? Is it been fun?
It's been pretty mild. We haven't had too much snow, at least in my neck of the woods. So that's been hopeful. It's been unseasonably cold the past few days, but we're actually looking forward to some warmer days in the coming weeks. So I'll take the reprieve whenever possible. I'm more of a spring fall guy, And I know living in Wisconsin in the Badger State, my ancestral homeland, it's something I have to deal with is the cold and the snow. So um, just have to roll with the punches here.
Well, I'm glad you're here because it's given me a friend in this state, and it's also given me access to somebody with incredible knowledge about all kinds of weird things. Maybe before we even kick off, I can't recommend people enough this book of yours, Wisconsin Legends for Kids, which I bought for my daughter sometime last year. It's fairly new, and she adores this book. Also, my girlfriend, as you know, Samantha, who you met at Milwaukee Paracon, she bought one for her daughter and her daughter's best friend, and they just adored the book as well. So any kid with interests in mythology or legends or weird stuff, as our children, one of my daughter's children do have, my girlfriend's daughters rather, they all are interested in the weird. So these books are perfect for kids who are into that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that was really the driving force was my she was 6 years old at the time. My daughter, on our walks to school, we'd exchange stories about Wisconsin, some of the more kid-friendly legends, and she really twisted my arm and said, "Dad, you really need to put this in a book." Just her learning to read and really gather different stories and different books that she likes. She said, "Dad, you really need to put this in the book." And I'm happy with the way it turned out, and she was tickled to have received it. And I appreciate you purchasing that. Samantha stopping by the booth at Milwaukee Paracon and grabbing a copy or two really made my day.
Well, it made ours to be able to go down there and to meet you. I had a little hiccup with some of the tech then. So maybe we could jump off by talking about, are there any really winter specific tales, do you think? Like,
There
we're
is
talking about all kinds of cryptids and monsters, but maybe if there's a winter specific one we can jump into.
there is a winter specific one. And my good friend Chad Lewis, fellow explorer and author, he won't even utter the word in the winter season, and that word is wendigo, if I dare to say it. But the story that I'm going to tell tonight, I got from Chad's book, Wendigo Lore, which is, if you're looking for any information about the Wendigo, is probably the first and last stop on that adventure, because him and Kevin Lee Nelson, they did all of the historical research. They dug through all the old accounts. They even went to a Lake Wendigo in northern Minnesota to see if they could have an encounter with the creature himself. And luckily he survived that. But the story I'm going to share from you was from a summer camp in Spooner, Wisconsin. So kind of the northwest part of the state, the old logging area of the state. Now, Chad, he had the pleasure or maybe displeasure of visiting a summer camp, something that kids look forward to every year, going off to camp and having a great time. And when he arrived at this old camp for his visit, he described it as rustic. He said the camp was positioned deep in the woods. He described the camp as looking like that of a lumberjack camp of the 1920s, old full log cabins, kind of a primitive setup. Now, it looks like it was, or he described it as looking like a discarded set from a horror movie. He wondered why any parent would send their kids there to such a rustic camp. And when he was visiting in that camp, he went to meet two brothers, Justin and John, and collect the encounter that they had at that summer camp. Now, just as he was the older brother, he was hanging out in his cabin at nightfall, where all of the best stories begin, when a flash of light from the window caught his peripheral vision. Now, he thought it might simply be a moth catching the light from the window, and he stopped and he took a closer look, and he saw something odd crouching and peering back at him through the window from the outside. Now, he locked eyes with this creature, and it stared back at him for almost 5 seconds before it darted off into the woods. Now, he felt the creature was evil. He felt fortunate he was safe in his cabin. Now, his brother, John, his younger brother, he was not so fortunate. John and his friends, they were wandering towards a different cabin. Now, John he stopped in his tracks. They spotted him and his friend or his buddy. They spotted a 7-foot creature standing in the woods just off the trail. Now, John told Chad that it looked like a normal person, but he had longer arms and legs, and it was very tall in pitch black. Now, John, he was so shaken that he immediately contacted the counselors. The counselors, they searched the perimeter looking for more reasonable explanations, perhaps wild animal. There may even be some stray elk in that area, or perhaps a prowler on the camp. Now, within a few minutes, they caught a fleeting glimpse of the creature as it ducked into the woods. Now, the counselors, they immediately instituted the buddy policy, and the campers, they weren't allowed to go outside without a friend. And the brothers, they were perplexed by what they saw. They both had an encounter. Now, it wasn't until returning home from that camp when they started searching online for that nightmare that lurked in the woods at their summer camp. They eventually came upon the image of the wendigo. Now, that's not something that's normally seen during the summer month. Like I mentioned, it's normally a winter creature, but it's still a real possibility to be seen during the summer months. Now, for those that are not familiar with the wendigo, it's a mythological figure from Chippewa and Algonquin lore. Now, it's said to be a cannibalistic giant of and preys on human flesh for its power. So it's not certain what the brothers saw that night, but it's a testament that these creatures, they still lurk in places as fun and as innocent as summer camps. So I'm really glad that Chad was able to share that experience with us via the book, and dig deeper into that as one of the main stories.
No, it's a fascinating story. It's weird being somebody who'd heard about Wendigo lore when I lived in Australia, from everything from Incredible Hulk comic books to movies like Ravenous to is the Algernon Blackwood story. It's something which is fairly prevalent in popular culture, but then to live in an area which isn't that far from where these stories originated, and still you hear about it. It's creepy. It makes wintertime far scarier when you live in an area that is A, brutalized by snow, and B, has those type of stories within its history. You look twice when you're out at night dragging your garbage bin down the driveway on a cold long winter's night, or making sure the chickens are locked in or going out there because you've heard something weird creeping around your chicken coop or something. So yeah, it's super scary. I appreciate you sharing that one with us. What else do you think's really scary in this state? Like, what are the other things? What's another critter or cryptid or monster that's scary?
On a moonlit night like tonight, we'd be remiss not to talk about the Beast of Bray Road, the Wisconsin Dogman, if you will. Now, most people know of Wisconsin's Dogman from Linda Godfrey, her wonderful documentation, how she kind of got thrown into the story in the early 90s, and then the story kind of ballooning and erupting from those early encounters. But my favorite one, it probably goes back to the 1930s, and it might be the first sighting of what we know as the Wisconsin Dogman, or the Wisconsin werewolf, the Dogman, Beast of Bray Road, whatever you want to call him. It seems like this is the same creature, or kind of the same archetype of that same creature. Now, the sighting, it happened in 1936, and it was on the grounds of St. Coletta's Catholic Convent and School in nearby Jefferson County. So Jefferson County, it's the next county over from Walworth County, where is the epicenter of the Bray Road phenomenon. Now, our hero in the story, his name's Mark Shackleman. He was a night watchman at the grounds of the convent. Now, as Shackleman was doing his rounds, he policed the grounds. He he spotted an unusual creature kneeling atop one of the Indian burial mounds near the campus. Now, the dark figure had long claws and it was scraping on top of the ground, but fled as soon as Shackleman approached. The next morning, Shackleman found rake marks atop that earthen mound, which appeared to be made by 3 or 4 claws. Now, Shackleman, he must have been a courageous dude, because I definitely would not do this. That same, or the following night, same time, he went back to that same place, and he was armed with nothing more than a heavy flashlight, and he marched right towards that mound. And sure enough, that same creature was scraping that same mound. But this time, the creature, it did not retreat. It stood up to face the watchman. Now, Shackleman, he reported that the beast was covered with dark black hair and gave off a bad odor. He said its eyes looked right into me and it made a sound low and mean. Now, Shackleman, he went on to say, I did the only thing I could do. I prayed to God to save me. He was on a Catholic convent, Catholic grounds, by the way, and it turned and it slowly walked away. So what did Shackleman encounter while he was on patrol? Was it an early sighting of the beast of Bray Road? Now, the mound builders, they believe that the earthworks like that burial mound, which that beast was perched upon, was a connecting point between the underworld, the earthly plane, as well as the sky plane being elevated. Now, was that Indian mound a portal that this beast came through, and now it's stuck in this earthly plane? Now, I'll let the listeners or the audience decide, but Shackleman, he never encountered that beast again. So it kind of defied explanation, but a lot of people attribute that to as an early sighting of the beast of Bray Road.
Yeah, there's something fascinating to me, again, being a transplanter here, that there are genuine things that sound like werewolves in the woods and fields, and even sometimes the streets of Wisconsin and neighboring kind of Michigan. And this whole area is loaded with things which seem to have climbed out of a nightmare. Is there a reason you think, Jeff, that there's, let's just maybe stick on the kind of Dogman-y type of stuff for a moment. Do you think there's a reason these things seem to be prevalent in this area as far as sightings and the lore and everything else goes?
You know, being perched upon that Indian burial mound, you almost have to wonder if it has something to do with that. Is it some kind of elemental spirit? Is it something that came through? We know the mound builders of this area, specifically in Madison, not too far from where I am, they have the largest complex of effigy mounds depicting all manners of woodland animals and even a couple humans, humanoid figure up in Baraboo that looks like it either has like a horned headdress or like a traditional headdress, maybe something like the god Pan. It's really hard to, really triangulate what is the cause of this, but we know it's very prevalent both in the lore and in eyewitness accounts to this day.
Yeah, again, it's something which has continued to fascinate me ever since I'm guessing it might have been on even Doug Highcheck's program Monster Quest back in the day, where Linda Godfrey was interviewed as well as people in Michigan, and I started to understand how prevalent that stuff was. It was long before I'd read Linda's books actually on it, which made me even more aware of how many of these reports are. And like you said, how they do seem to tie into things like, Native American burial grounds. And we had a question which isn't exactly on Dogman. We'll probably come back to Dogman, but so I don't forget, this is from the Pukwudgie Whisperer, Susie Bastille, who's a good friend of the show. And she says, do you, Jeff, have any local wee folk stories, like anything about the fair folk or something similar in Wisconsin?
There are several accounts of them. I'm not too well versed on them. One of my favorite ones actually comes from, I talked about that camp up in Spooner. There was also a story that came from the 1900s, and it was 1919, so that's well over 100 years ago. The automobile was just reaching mass markets. And in this section of Wisconsin, these were lumber roads. So most of the ways to get anywhere were either by, horse and buggy trails or by logging roads. Now, this story revolves around Harry Anderson and his father. I believe in the recount I've heard, it was like it might have been like a early Model A or Model T, so a very primitive automobile. Now, it says that the Anderson family, they went out for an excursion, and Mr. Anderson proclaimed on that ride that they were running low on oil. Now, you see, back in those days, cars they need both gas and oil to run. The oil was a total loss, so anything that the engine didn't use, it spit out, and then you had to refill it with fresh oil. So, Mr. Anderson, he was fresh out of oil. He handed his 13-year-old son Harry an oil can and said, "Head up on that road, Harry, and see if you can get some old farmer to lend you some." Now, on this remote county road outside of Barron, Wisconsin, Anderson the younger, he spied a ridgeline of a farmer's house in the distance. So he cut through fields, made his way to that, knocked on the door, ended up getting a fresh oil can from the kindly farmer. And uh, he started to head back, and it became almost nightfall. Now, halfway back to his father, waiting by his automobile, Harry was startled by what he could only describe as a military procession. Now, Harry, he froze in his tracks, then quickly slunk behind a tree just off the trail. Now, he heard what sounded like a military chant. Now, I believe this was either Fate Magazine or Amazing Stories that published this verse. And the story went 1, 2, 3, 4. We won't stop till the end of the war in 1994. Sound off 1, 2, sound off 3, 4. Detail 1, 2, detail 3, 4. Now, peering out, Harry saw what he could only describe as a dwarfish platoon, 20 or so little people clad in lederhosen, all with bleached white skin and bald heads, marching across his field of vision. Now, the procession soon passed, and Harry continued on his trek back to his waiting father. Now, we're not sure what Harry actually saw that night, but it's said that he never wavered from that claim. Now, that band of little people that marched through the woods that day. So he was always perplexed by that, and apparently he took that story to his grave.
It's interesting because fairy processions, of course, are a constant within fairy faith. Back in Ireland, for example, that you see whole brigades of them marching, particularly on times like the quarter days or at Halloween or in midsummer, where they might be traveling between their residences from their summer and their winter. Well, maybe not midsummer, maybe early. It would probably be the spring equinox, I guess, when they'd be doing that, when they're going between their winter and their summer residences. But just genuinely, fairy faith has a lot of stories about processions. And of course, it might be just as well that individual had kind of hidden and not got involved, because legend would have it, if you would get caught up in a procession, you would get taken to fairylands, and you would probably never come back to the land of mortal men. Before we move, as I said, we would probably go back to Dogman. Maybe this is a roundabout way of doing it, but when you were talking about Native American mounds and the like, mound builders, we had a number of people making all kinds of comments about asking questions about the mounds. And Nancy Malcolm, a regular viewer here, said, does each mound effigy reflect a different monster being, or is every mound supposed to be a passage for only one type of monster? Or regardless, whether you can answer that question or not, feel free if you can. But are there any more mound stories or anything else you can tell us regarding mounds and their connection with the supernatural, with monsters or the paranormal?
It's really hard to tell the exact purpose of the mounds, because the culture that left them on our earth, they didn't have written stories. They had oral histories. Now, from what I've been able to ascertain by the experts in the field, were that the mound builders, they like to build both the animals of the earthly plane. So anything that they would hunt, whether it's a bear, a deer, and then even, I guess, bear, deer, even like turtles, lizards, anything like that are all depicted within these earthly mounts. But within these tableaus, they also include the higher existence animals like the thunderbird. And then they even have the underwater panther, which is kind of the nemesis of that thunderbird. And there is one specific effigy mound complex that, is only a couple miles from me. So whenever I get a chance to visit it, it's on the grounds of the Mendota State Mental Health Institute, which was the site of the old General Hospital in Madison. And there they have the largest existing Thunderbird effigy, and I think the third largest Thunderbird effigy, as well as another smaller. So they have a group of three. They have a very rare four-legged deer, and I believe there's a turtle and a bear on that as well. But curiously, just across the road, they have a underwater panther, kind of a ring-tailed. It almost looks like a lemur when you look at it from above, but
Wow.
according to the experts, it is the underwater panther. And coincidentally, there is a little bay there that goes to a place called Governor's Island. Now, Governor's Island is more of a peninsula, but in that bay of that little peninsula, there has long held indigenous myths of this underwater panther toppling canoes and taking the occupants of those canoes captive underneath the water. So to see all three of those, both the natural ground level animals, the animals that the Indians harvested, also the thunderbirds of the sky, of the high plane of existence, and then the underworld with that underwater panther is quite the anomaly to have all three of those planes depicted and intact.
It's just fascinating. Speaking about Native American traditions of people being dragged underneath the surface of the water, I know we were going to talk a little bit about, or you suggested talking a little bit about Devil's Lake tonight. I don't know a lot of the things you're about to talk about, but one story I do know is there used to meant to be some type of monster, or I guess I always imagined it as a Nessie type or a sea serpent type thing, which was meant to have taken down Native American canoes and dragged the braves down under the water. But I don't know if that's a story you can elaborate on more, or you mentioned actual deep ones, as you called them in your notes.
Yeah, so it's interesting how the two stories kind of intersect. Yes, there are stories of a monster in Devil's Lake from bygone era of toppling canoes or preying on the local tribes that inhabited the shore. There's even one of the lake going dry and the Indians waking up to find the monster there in the middle of the lake.
And I'll just cut in real quick, just maybe because I stupidly introduced it without saying where it is, but can you describe where Devil's Lake is?
So Devil's Lake is almost in the center of the states. It's between Baraboo and Wisconsin Dells. It is a Devil's Lake State Park. It has Wisconsin's most visited state park. I believe it plays host to almost 2 million residents. And if you step foot in that park, you'll understand why, because there's all manner of recreation, from picnics to swimming to boating, canoeing, kayaking, all of that, as well as these beautiful limestone bluffs. I believe they're quartzite, actually, not limestone, that people can hike on. They can do mountain climbing. There's a campground nearby. It's a popular place for Boy Scouts to gather, for people to have a campsite. It's just a wonderful place for enjoying Wisconsin, and it's not too far from Baraboo, which is kind of the circus town where the Ringling Brothers had their summer camp, as well as the most popular water park area in the world, and the Wisconsin Dells. So it's great. It's accessible, being centrally located, and there's no wonder why it's the most visited site in Wisconsin as far as state parks go.
I'm sorry though, I kind of cut you off when you were getting into the actual meat of the sandwich, the legends. I just wanted to set the scene for
Yeah.
folks before you told him more of the story. So back to some of the weirdness of Devil's Lake.
Yeah. So, there's always been the talk of some kind of water monster lurking in Devil's Lake, and there's actually an old legend of Devil's Lake that talks about the Thunderbirds battling these water serpents. Maybe they're underwater panthers, like they saw near Governor's Island, or maybe they're more serpent-like. It's not really clear because it is an oral legend, and it does tend to kind of reshape with tellings over the years. But there is a story of these thunderbirds vanquishing the serpents that live in the lake, grabbing boulders from the nearby bluffs. And if you visit Devil's Lake, you'll see that the bluff sides nearly come right down to the water. And then you see all of these rocks strewn about the shores. So is it evidence of a battle that happened many eons ago between these two entities, the Thunderbird and the Water Spirit? I don't know, but it makes for a great story. And then going back to the mounds, there's actually what almost looks like a Birdman mound right there on the shores, and it's well preserved, despite people trampling on it. Right there on Devil's Lake, they have it marked off, and then they try to mow around it and keep the grass longer, so you can actually see it not too far from, I believe it is the south side of Devil's Lake parking lot. So kind of some almost looks like a Mothman creature, to put it that way. But some say it's a split tail hawk. Some people say it's a thunderbird, and other people say it's a birdman. But it just really shows that there is a rich cultural landscape there. And what we know about Wisconsin and its habitation, it is one of the oldest habitated sites, and goes back to just after the Ice Age. We know that it has been habitated near Landbridge State Park and Devil's Lake.
We had a regular listener, viewer of the show, Flat Rockland. Hey, Flat, lovely to have you here. Mentioned that they have a Diablo Lake up in Washington State. It's a very squatchy area near the Canadian border. And I remember John Keel talking about, I think it might be something he called a name game, or that referred to various different things, people having the same surnames and towns with the same names being more active. But if you look at a place which normally has like devil in it or Diablo in it, like Devil's Lake or Devil's Peak or Devil's Gorge, or, any of these things, there normally seems to be something about that area that indicates it's either still being haunted by some monster or some creature, or historically it was haunted by some monster or some creature. Are there other places in Wisconsin that you know of that have devil or something in their title which implies there's something strange there, or there used to be something strange there?
There are a lot. I believe it is, well, obviously with Devil's Lake, there's the Devil's Doorway. There's a road there called Devil's Delight. And then there's another place up near Stout with devil in the name. I'm drawing a blank on that one, but that's one that Chad Lewis has. Devil's Punch Bowl is called. That's what it's called. I have yet to visit there, but there's a lot of legends there of sprite-like creatures. One of the legends is if you collect water from the stream that runs through Devil's Punch Bowl, that it will stay cold, or at least feel cold to the touch, no matter what temperature you bring it into, whether you bring it in your car or your home, it'll still feel cold to the touch. And then I know there's like just various, like a Devil's Elbow up by Nakusa. And I know I did a listing a while ago, but I'm drawing a blank on all of them.
It just fascinates me that you, in the title, and somebody mentioned, I think, Flat Rockland, Ape Canyon, for example, which is named after the famous Bigfoot or wild man or ape attack on the miners back in the 1920s near Mount St. Helens. So yeah, it's often in the titles of, or the names of places, there's a suggestion that something weird might have happened there. And sometimes Ape Canyon, for example, is kind of, it was supposedly named after the famous event, but sometimes you almost have to wonder if the naming of the place doesn't,
Yeah. So as far as the name goes for Devil's Lake, the inhabitants of that they called it Minnewakan, which meant spirit lake or sacred lake. And it wasn't until the early French explorers came to Wisconsin that they really coined the name the Devil's Lake. And one of the early correspondents from one of the French explorers, John T. de Laurent, he said that he visited the Devil's Lake and he talked about the granite bluffs and how they block the sun out. Shortly after noon, the sun would go behind those bluffs, and it would really have an ominous feeling to it, and that's why he called it the Devil's Lake.
And speaking about granite bluffs and differences, I suppose, in the geology of a place, there are areas in Wisconsin where perhaps it's the geology itself which might have something to do with the manifestations that happen again. This is something also that John Keel sometimes talked about. But for example, Devil's Lake, as you mentioned, maybe you can tell us something about the Driftless area, which is an area which is very rocky and hilly, because I think when the glaciers moved through, they didn't flatten that part like the rest of the state. But it's also a very rocky and granity and weird area. Are there any tales you can tell us from
So
the Driftless area?
the Baraboo Range is really the start. And if you drive Highway 12 going up to Baraboo, you actually find a sign, a historical marker that talks about the Baraboo Range and what they call the terminal moraine. Now, the terminal moraine is the edge of where the glacier kind of ground through Wisconsin. And if you look on a map, especially a topo map of Wisconsin, you'll see that the southwest of the state is all hilly and craggy, and then the north and east part and down into the southeast, depending on where you're looking, is all kind of glaciated, and the rolling farm hills and the pastures that everybody thinks about when they think of Wisconsin. So looking at that and seeing that Devil's Lake is kind of positioned on that liminal scape of that glacial terminus kind of makes you think, okay, is that a window area? Now, as you asked about the driftless region, that's where a lot of the good lore comes from, because it hasn't been ground down. And actually, the earliest parts of Wisconsin, Wisconsin was first discovered by French explorers. Then they came in. I believe they launched out of like the Hudson Bay area of New York. They followed the Great Lakes and then came into Green Bay, which is kind of the little crotch between, if you look at Wisconsin on your hand, you'll see that the thumb part, that is Door County, and the little crotch between the mainland, Wisconsin, and Door County is called Green Bay. And we know Green Bay because of the Green Bay Packers. So that's kind of where the first French explorer made landfall. And then all of that area was kind of built out, but then people started going to the southwest to look for natural resources, and specifically lead deposits. And that was the earliest part of Wisconsin that was settled, were for these lead deposits that the miners would come in and mine that lead ore, and they used them for munitions and lead piping of the day, and sent that stuff back east. So that was the earliest part of Wisconsin there, and a lot of the lore comes from that area of the state, whether it's the mini mastodons of Richland County that I detail in my book, or the Mineral Point vampire is another one that comes from that area, as well as the Ridgeway ghost. Now, the Ridgeway that they talk specifically about, it is a town, and it is in just west of Madison, and it's kind of on the edge of the driftless region, and a beautiful place to go. But this was a U.S. Army road called the Old Military Ridge State Trail, which is now more of a bike path. But there is a lot of lore that comes from there, almost a phantom-like creature, not really a ghost, but more of like I guess phantom is the best way to describe it. And it was said to jump on these passersby's buggies as they were making their way down the ridgeway from Green Bay to Mineral Point, playing tricks on people, loosening axle bolts, taking hitch pins off of the horse and the wagon, and just kind of creating chaos. And then it culminated in Mineral Point with this Mineral Point vampire, which is kind of a spring-heeled Jack character that's said to hang out in the cemetery just outside of town.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it was 1981, and it was the Mineral Point Police Department. They got a curious call one night, and they said that a vampire was lurking the local cemetery, the Graceland Cemetery. Now, Officer John Pepper, he responded to this call. Now, with April Fool's Day looming, people thought maybe this was just an elaborate practical joke. Now, Pepper, he responds to the call, and he encounters what he describes as a huge person with a white painted face. Now, Pepper pursued, but that spring-heeled character, it leapt a 6-foot tall fence with ease. Pepper, cold night, late March, the guy's out of the cemetery. He just kind of moves on, but he goes back to the station and he tells several of the other guys what he encountered. And then the next morning, several officers were dispatched to the cemetery. They were befuddled when they found the footsteps of that perpetrator lead to a fence line. But on the other side of the fence, there were no prints. Now, following the news of that encounter, a flap of vampire reports they cropped up in the following days. Now, Mineral Point Police Department, they blamed the rash of sightings on pranksters who had learned of the story from the night before. So they thought people are just having a good time. It's almost April Fool's Day. It's late winter, early spring. People are just kind of blowing off some steam. But it was 23 years later. It was 2004 when several apartment dwellers near that Graceland Cemetery reported a creepy-looking man that purportedly attacked residents of the complex. In similar spring-heeled fashion, the attacker jumped from a tree and landed near his victims. Now, the police, they investigated and they gave chase to the figure, but again, that vampire eluded them. And then 4 years later, 2008, another vampire report came in from Mineral Point. And this time, a couple who was fishing encountered a creeper. Now, the figure, they stalked the young couple and chased them to the safety of their car. Now, the police, they responded again, and they found the couple's abandoned gear, but no vampire. So the sightings, they just seem to have washed up now, but it begs the question, what did the residents actually witness? Was it a prankster? Or was it that early Ridgeway Phantom type entity that kind of ended up in that section of the state at the end of that trail? We're not really sure.
Gosh, so we have not only wendigos and dogmen, we have vampires in.
What good werewolf story wouldn't involve a vampire?
That's very true. Speaking of werewolf stories, as we were before, and it was the second show stories we started the show with. Are there any others that you want to? Because I know the listeners always love to hear Dogman stories.
Dogman
stories. Certainly, you have our share in this state.
I have a good one, and it actually involves a werewolf. Now, this one comes from Jefferson, Wisconsin, which is not too far from where Shackleman had that first account. A driver passing by a cemetery saw what appeared to be a tall, hairy creature with a snout. And now This was a particularly curious character because it was dressed in full gentleman's evening clothes of a bygone era. It was tuxedoed. Now, he reportedly stood amongst the headstones of this cemetery, and as the driver pulled up to the side of the road to get a closer look, the dapper beast was still standing there. Now, this guy that had seen it, he had reported it to a local man, a convenience store owner, who quickly laughed it off. Now, 1 month later, a salesman from Minnesota, a man that was not acquainted with that first witness, was visiting that same local man. Now, that salesman, he told him the same exact story as the first account. This time, after pulling over to get a closer look at this dapper beast, the creature turned its head and met his gaze. And that salesman was reportedly much shaken from that encounter. So now we have not only Dogman, but we have a tuxedoed werewolf stalking Jefferson County. And that was a story passed along by my friend Frank Anderson out of Wisconsinology fame out of Appleton. His father was actually that local man who was reported that legend. So
just another fascinating story, and one I never heard. That's one of the reasons I love talking to you so much, Jeff, is I obviously hear about some of these stories because I'm interested. I live in Wisconsin, but you are just filled with so many bizarre tales that I have never heard about this state. What's one of your favorites? Like, what is one of your favorite really out there monster stories from Wisconsin that you haven't told us tonight?
So when I had first started Badgerland Legends, I had really put a lot of thought into what is my favorite Wisconsin legend, because we've got so many great ones to pull from, whether, it's the Hodag, the Beast of Bray Road, but it might be these, Susie asked earlier about the little people. Well, here's a little person story for her. The story goes that in the 1950s, a group of disgruntled little people, they had gotten sick of the circus life. They got sick of the taskmaster, ringmaster, and they ended up killing him and then escaping to a little community just outside of Milwaukee called Muskego. Now, this place turned out to be a mythological place called Haunteville. Now, it's at the end of a place called Mystic Drive, and it's said that there is a group of these little people, these circus workers, that live there, and anybody who tries to come in, they'll chase off. And then there's a story about one day a young boy with albinism, about 10 years old, he kind of wanders into the camp, and the Haunchies, they noticed, it's what the little people were called. I'm not sure why, but the Haunchies noticed this young boy with albinism, and they also noticed that he was a bit of an outcast. So they ended up taking him in and raising him, and now he is a full-grown man, and he is a protector. And it said, if you go down Mystic Drive and you go to Haunteville or try to locate Haunteville, you will be greeted by an old man with albino skin, albino features, and holding a shotgun or wielding an axe to protect his new adoptive family. And that has to be absolutely one of my favorite stories from Wisconsin. Whether there is a shred of truth behind it, I'll let you decide.
I love the Haunteville story. I hadn't heard that Haunteville story. Like, I just heard about it. I knew supposedly it existed. It's one of those things I've always thought maybe I should do a road trip down there.
Absolutely, yeah. I wish we'd have thought about it when we're so close to Milwaukee, but maybe this upcoming Milwaukee Paracon. But our friend Mike Huberty, he actually grew up not too far from there. He has a very entertaining story about going down to Haunteville, and we captured that on the Wisconsin Legends podcast episode titled Haunteville, where we kind of go over all the mythology, a lot of little people lore. So Susie, if you're still listening, You can hear all of that, and then the show ends with Haunteville by Mike's band Sunspot, where he kind of recounts the tale in a rock anthem kind of way. So that's definitely worth checking out. And if you want to see the video for Haunteville, you can just check that out on YouTube for Sunspot Haunteville.
People should definitely check out your podcast and your website and your books. All of it's so fascinating. My girlfriend Samantha mentioned back when we were talking about Devil's Location, she said Devil's Island is another place.
Yeah, I see
Lots
that.
of sandstone bluffs.
I'm not familiar with Devil's Island. Do you know, or can she chime into where that's located?
I'll get her to put it up there. Sam,
Okay.
can you comment whereabouts it actually is, Devil's Island? I have no idea, and neither does Jeff. I never heard about it before. But again, I'm
But
fascinated.
definitely something to look into.
Yeah, I wonder I guarantee there'd be something there. There'd be some tale.
And I wonder if that
addicted to it.
is maybe like a pseudonym for another place name of Devils, since I haven't heard of it. But yeah, curious to know more about that. Always fun. I always learn something new in this field. Do you think, I've been doing this for almost 5 years, doing Badgerland Legends, trying to do a post a day, try not to recycle too many legends, but, the list is kind of running thin, but always a new story or a new place or a new haunted place pops into, kind of the collective, and I get to research and write about it.
Do you get many people who reach out to you as one of the go-to people to share their Wisconsin stories with? Like, is that how you come across some of this stuff? Or?
A lot of times, yeah, people will kind of mention in comments or passings, but I always keep my inbox open, especially Facebook, Instagram. If you want to drop me a story of an encounter, I usually don't republish encounters. Most of my stuff is on the people or the specific places, but if you got something that you really need to get off your chest, I am all ears, and I'd love to interact with you.
Well, that's an invitation to reach out to Jeff.
Yeah.
Now, Sam says it's the Apostle Islands.
Okay, by the Apostle Islands.
In Ashland County. I don't even know where that is.
It is the very northeast of northwest of the state. Beautiful country up there. There are Mike actually runs a tour out of there, American Ghost Walks, up there by the Apostle Islands, and there are kayaking caves to explore. It's supposed to be one of the most beautiful parts of Wisconsin, right there on kind of the shores of Lake Superior.
Yeah, Sam just Facebooked me a photo actually, and it looks gorgeous there. And
Yeah.
she said people kayak there, so apparently it is quite popular.
Yeah, definitely.
Unless there's some angry Sasquatch is going to pull you off the boat, or some what are they called? Water panthers going to come up and grab you and take you to your.
Yeah, watch out for always have to watch out for the vaunted water panthers.
Now I'm going to be worried every time I swim here. I have been to Devil's Lake. I haven't swum in the water, I don't think there, but I've been there. It sure is pretty. I think there was some hideous murder there during COVID as well, if I recall.
Yeah, it was the October of 2020, and it was a normal October day. October, with the leaves changing, it's a very popular time, and a gentleman was out for a jog. I think he was, excuse me if I get this wrong, but I think he was like in his early 30s, and he was out, just doing some trail running or jogging, a very popular thing to do. And out of nowhere, somebody stabbed him and murdered him. And to this day, that crime is unsolved.
Grief.
Yeah.
You have to wonder again about the significance of the place name where something like that happens.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of the most enchanted. And speaking of the Wisconsin Legends podcast, we did on an episode specifically on Devil's Lake and all of the legends and the lore that surround there from everything that. And you did ask me about the deep ones and Devil's Lake. Since we're back on that topic, I can share that one with you now. August Derleth. A lot of people don't know that name. Obviously, I know you do, Dean, and probably some people in your audience, but the name that he's associated with most is H.P. Lovecraft. Now, August Derleth, he ran a publishing company out of Sauk City, Wisconsin, in Sauk County. Now, Sauk County as you know, is home to Devil's Lake, as well as a couple other significant lakes that Derleth like to call Cthulhu power zones. Now, these power zones, they were a perfect setting for some ceremonial magicians to evoke an ancient water-dwelling race. So it was the 1970s, and Derleth had been publishing about these Cthulhu power zones, and it attracted a group of magicians from Chicago about this. And the goal of the magicians was to conjure up this race of deep ones, which are, if you go onto Google image search and look up Lovecraft, the deep ones, you will find these hideous pictures of these humanoid fish frog entities. Now, they're said to have shiny skin, scales, and webbed hands and feet. So just kind of deplorable looking creatures. And I'm not sure why anybody would want to conjure these, but a group of these ceremonial magicians, they attempted to do just that at Devil's Lake and 2 other Sauk County lakes. And just to put a finer point on Derleth. So after H.P. Lovecraft died, Derleth, he acquired all the rights to the Lovecraft mythos, and he compiled them in the anthologies that we know today, and kind of created what we know as the Cthulhu mythos. So these ceremonial magicians, they gathered at Devil's Lake, as well as 2 other Sauk County lakes, as I mentioned. And now it's not certain if the ritual that they casted there, the spell that they casted, was successful. But like we talked earlier about all of the legends of kind of water creatures or sea monsters or lake monsters, especially those associated with Devil's Lake, a lot of times these rituals, they have a tendency to ripple both forward and backwards in time. So there are long held beliefs of those. So perhaps those were actually caused in the 1970s by this group of these Crowleyan sex magicians. And I believe it was a Kenneth Grant book where he went into more explicit detail into what exactly these rituals, not exactly PG, involved, but they tried to evoke the deep ones. And whether they were successful or not, I guess you'll have to take a swim in Devil's Lake. But just know if you do, one of these slimy deep ones might be watching you.
I'm glad I didn't swim there. I'm even more pleased than I was before. Sam got back to us and said Devil's Island is home of the Machi Manitou or something.
Machi Manitou. I'm not
Yeah,
familiar
and maybe
with that.
Jeff can do
I
some
would definitely put a pin in that. Thanks for passing
digging.
that
And
along.
she also
Sam.
sent me a message saying this is just something she pulled from Google. She copied and pasted it. The Indians in the early days declared it to be home of the Machi Manitou, the evil spirits. It's just she literally copied and pasted it from Wiki or
All
Google
right.
or something.
Okay. I'm going to look into that. Thanks for the tip. I'm always excited to find something new. Yeah, it sounds a lot like the Mishipishi, which is another depiction of that underwater panther thing. And there have been rock art depictions of the Mishipishu, and a lot of people say that they look like the modern day Hodag lore.
Wow, that'd be
Yeah.
something.
So instead of aquatic, the Hodag would be kind of the land version of this.
Maybe the Hodag is we didn't even get to the Hodag. Maybe the Hodag.
We didn't. Wisconsin's favorite monster, Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Hodag Heritage Fest coming up May 17th if you want to really take in a spectacle.
Every year you want me to go, and every year I fail you and don't get up there. Jeff, we had maybe one more question, and then we'll move on. We've got a question from Red Edge Savage. He says, any updates with the Beast of Bray Road? Do you know any news stories from there?
There are always, stories that are bandied about. I don't know of any specific ones. I know Donna Fink, she does a lot of the logging of these stories, and there is a Facebook page dedicated to the Beast of Bray Road where you can kind of follow the most recent happenings of the Dogman phenomenon. I'll have to touch base with Lee Hample. Lee Hample he owns the farm on Bowers Road, which is adjacent or intersects with Bray Road, where a lot of this activity is happening.
Well, Jeff, you were always a fountain of wisdom. I had people in the chat saying to get you back to talk more about this stuff, including Catherine Fourfeathers before. We will have to have you on to cover more Wisconsin weirdness at some stage in the not too distant future. But tell us where people can get a hold of Wisconsin Legends for Kids. I'll also have a link in the show notes, and where else they can get a hold of your podcast, your blog, and anything that you're up to.
Yeah, so Wisconsin Legends for Kids, best way to get that's on Amazon. Should come right up. And Wisconsin Legends Podcast, wherever finer podcasts are served. Check me out, Badgerland Legends, on both Facebook and Instagram. That's where I'm the most active. And yeah, don't be shy. Feel free to shoot me a DM or leave a comment on one of my posts, and let's connect and interact.
Well, man, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's always such a joy and delight to talk to you, Jeff.
Likewise, Dean. I always am excited to hear what you have cooking.
Well, until I talk to you again, Jeff, and hopefully that'll be in the very near future, until I talk to everybody else out there, which will be next week. Same weird time, same weird/Untold radio channel. Keep it weird.